I'm P. Roberto Garcia, Distinguished Clinical Professor of International Business and Faculty Director of the Indiana University CIBER. Welcome to this special edition of our CIBER Pedagogy webinar series on the Kelley Global Foundations Core. Faculty across the world rapidly transitioned to online teaching this spring, as we know, and the Kelley School was no different. To further complicate the situation, about 20 of my colleagues found themselves having to also transition what is typically a 10-day international travel experience course for students to an online format. We thought it would be helpful to hear from a few of them how they approached this task. Our guest today is my colleague, Tatiana Kolovou, Senior Lecturer in Communications, Professional and Computer Skills. Tatiana, thank you for joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Roberto.
So tell us about your course. Give us a brief summary, its objectives, outcomes, and how many times you've taught this course and taken students to other countries.
Sure. As you know, since we started down this path together, about 10 years ago, I took the first group of students to Greece. We were trying to enhance the global awareness of our students in the undergraduate body, and decided that in the second year it would be a good idea to take 8 weeks of an in-residence course and study the culture, the politics, the economy, the legal system, and many other parts of what constitute the understanding of a country, and study them in the classroom before we traveled with the students. So as you and I know, the first time I took them in 2011, everyone came back in one piece. And since then, we have been able to expand to so many other countries. But it's been 10 years, and I don't know if that was a fickle finger of fate that year number 10 would be COVID extravaganza. But I must say that I'm very proud of how we pivoted and how we were able to still create value for the students. Since I teach communication and cross-cultural communication, my focus of the course is for the students to see how businesses operate in a higher context culture than the United States, how people communicate, how business is done more on a relationship basis, how a higher power distance culture operates in the business world, how Greece is very risk averse, how that plays out and how that reflects on innovation, and how do the younger generations see the crisis or the coming out of the big crisis in Europe and in Greece that has been the case. So for 10 years, well, we've been able to create a huge understanding and awareness for students. I'm proud to say, as you are with many of our programs, that they leave our programs wanting to travel more, wanting to understand the world better, wanting to have deep conversations with people from other parts of the world. So I'm very proud of what we've created. So that covers a little bit of the learning objectives and how long it's happened, how long the course has been going on.
So I know that you give your students a lot of real world experiences you've just explained. So how do you do that online? What was your objective and what did you want the students to gain from it online? So
when the trip got canceled and we had to pivot to online experiences, don't forget, these are 3 credit hour courses. From an academic standpoint, we were left with 1.5 credit hours that needed to be accomplished. And I really wanted them, since I teach communication, to communicate with other people, some of them their age or experts. So I reached out. For one thing, we always do a project with students, with clients. So just like many of the other courses, we really forged ahead. We were able to do online presentations. The client received so much value from the ideas that the students were able to develop. And then the students learned how to communicate in a high context culture. We take the recommendation approaches a little differently and do it virtually, which was a great, I would say, baptism by fire for them. So that was the first part that we were trying to accomplish. And then I looked at what were the things, the highlights that I wanted to focus on when we were in country. And there's some experiences, as you know, that, well, the tactile experiences are very difficult to replicate when you're not traveling, but there were some people specifically that I wanted them to meet that they wouldn't get to meet face to face. But because of the relationships that I have and the many opportunities to interact, I had a chance to have a couple of very good guest speakers that you would think that they were right there. So what I did is, since we're talking learning, I would have them review the biography or the CV of the speaker, and I'd have them post questions before meeting the speaker, and I would share some of these questions with the speaker. So one was talking about geopolitics, and another one was really, he's sort of the bookend of the trip anyway. So I had them at the very end in April of talking about the economy or the future of the Greek economy. After each of the sessions, the students were able to post reflective questions, and they had to synthesize some of the content that we shared in the class as well. So taking those, not ending the presentation to the client, tapping onto the two key speakers I wanted them to see. And then I did one other objective that I had was for them to understand, or to, as we've talked quite often, can they read between the lines? Can they see an interaction and see what's behind it? So I was able to find a movie that was a cultural movie. It's called A Touch of Spice. And it's about the Ottoman Empire's occupation of Asia Minor and the big immigration switch in the earlier century. And it's all about food, but there's really a huge double meaning of everything, which initially when you see the movie, you don't realize it, but there's so much to unpack. And then of course I have a Greek friend who is an expert on film, and he was the one then to debrief. So they watched the movie and then they came in to debrief the movie with the expert, who happened to be friends with the person that made the movie. So it's, you know, all those connections. But I would say the biggest highlight from my class, and actually in the evaluations and reflections, the one that the students came back getting the most out of, when we go to Greece, we always visit a university and we always have an opportunity for the students to sit down with students. So I facilitate it a little bit. I jump in and I say, let's touch upon grade school education. What type of classes do you take? How is that process? How is that reflected on how society runs? And we start with light subjects like that, and you wouldn't know it, but then we get into gun control and elections and politics, and they get really deep. How was I going to replicate that? So what I did is I split, you know, our classes have teams that they do their projects in. I split those even further because I wanted the students also to spend time with students in the class they hadn't seen as much. So I lumped 3 students together in these little pockets, and then I found students in Greece. I promised them t-shirts next time I go back. I'll be hauling those. And I was able to ask them specific questions that they had to debrief, and then they had to report, or they had to give me the Zoom recording of what they did. In those reflections, so much I couldn't have orchestrated it better. They did one of those, we have so much in common, we're so much alike, but there's so much that we didn't realize this is what surprised me. You know, it was right after Easter, and I had told them that Easter is a big cultural, big holiday, religious holiday, and the Greek students were talking about social distancing and quarantine and not being able to be with their families, and they couldn't have understood that better. I think even being in a normal situation, if we would have traveled to Greece, they would not have captured that as much. So I'm sure that, you know, many other activities could be possible, but for me, these were the few. Speaking to the client virtually, meeting with experts, doing the movie review and debrief, and meeting with students really were the best. I would probably replicate them again if this happens again.
So is there anything else that you remember from the student feedback, the student experience? Because it's got to be incredibly disappointing to have it so close, and you're going to go there and you're looking forward to it, and then now you can't go.
Yeah. Yeah.
What else did the students say on a positive note in spite of this disappointment?
Yeah, I was surprised how many of the, well, first of all, as you probably know, when we all had to announce to our courses that we're not going, there was big disappointment, and then starts I don't want to do any extra work. I'm so stressed out about everything else I have to do. So I kind of had to sell it. And when we got started, the conversations every week, we kind of created a rhythm. And at the end, in their reflections, they talk about, even that I'm disappointed that I didn't get to go, I learned so much more than I would have learned just out of a book. And to me, that was just huge, even to the point, to give you an example, we created a group me, which we always do before we travel. We were so close to getting on a plane within a week. And we continued the group me, and it was interesting that they kept following, because Greece, for your viewers that may not know this, was one of the pioneers in dealing very strictly with the COVID situation, and took some measures that really saved. We had, I think, up to date, maybe we have 160 deaths in 11.5 million people in a country. That's remarkable, but that happened because of the measures they took. So there was a lot of press, and they kept sharing the articles that they were reading. So to me, it says they were looking and they were reading articles that they probably wouldn't have paid attention to after the fact. So I must say a lot of positive things came out of this. And it did teach me that maybe by having the connections, maybe by using technology, maybe we can still create global awareness without putting our feet on the homeland of the country that we're studying. I'm not saying that it should replace it,
Right.
but maybe there are some potentials, and maybe you'll talk to other people too that bring students from different countries to do joint projects together. That's a whole other dimension, but I think there's a lot that we can do.
What about you as an instructor, reflecting back on being thrown into the situation suddenly? What kind of lessons did you take away about these experiences?
My first reaction, honestly, Roberta, was to let me just kind of put a reading list together and have them write another paper. That was the easy thing to do. And I must say, like many of your viewers, I was pretty tempted, because I was pretty worried about the other classes that I was teaching. But when I looked at my learning objectives and really wanted to make a memorable, they'll never forget 2020 and what happened, make a memorable impression for them, I really went back to pushing for rigor. I probably would have even made it more rigorous, although we have to be mindful that we wouldn't want to stress them out too much. Mm-hmm. But I am glad that I did what I did, and now I'm glad that I have those options to maybe pull out of my sleeve again. I probably would want to create, if there was one thing I'd want to do even more, was to create more connections with Greek students who would want to reach out to our students. Even a one-on-one would be even better, but that would require 26 Greek students. So that was not possible. I learned not to be afraid, and I learned just to embrace ambiguity, just like we tell them and we try to coach them to do, and just roll up our sleeves and just jump in and do it.
Wonderful. Really, really good insights. Now, do you have any other final comments for our audience here and about this discussion?
Sure. In cross-cultural communication, I would say different is not deficient. And even though I was doing things the same way or a certain way for 10 years, it was a different approach. It was not deficient. It was not bad. It was different. The learning still happened. I can't wait to be there and take the students there next year. I told them all that I would be happy, and I hope that they want to travel abroad, and I'll write the recommendations. But this was a special year, and I have to say, I leave it as a learning year and a learning curve for all of us, but hopefully we'll all be better educators as a result.
I agree. Well, thank you very much. This has been a pleasure, very valuable, and I think everybody can see why you're one of our very best star instructors here at the Kelley School of Business.
Thank you.
Thank you. And for those watching this discussion, if you have any questions about this video or suggestions for future pedagogy topics, please contact ciber@indiana.edu.